Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. In the Pac-12, late at night, there's a very underrated game between the Oregon State Beavers going on the road to play the Stanford Cardinal. Who do I think is going to win this game? Let's break it down. Now, Oregon State to start the season is 3-2, and Johnathan Smith has really turned Oregon State around as their head coach. Oregon State has not been good since the early 2000s, and finally last year they made a bowl game. And Oregon State's been a much improved football team with him as head coach. To start this season, they beat Boise State 34-17. That was a good win because Boise State obviously is one of the best group of 5 teams in the country, even though they're not as good this year. Then they won at Fresno State 35-32. Again, Fresno State's one of the better group of 5 teams, and Fresno State might not be as good this year, but still, Oregon State getting those wins is key because now they're going to be able to maybe make a bowl game easier because they're not going to have to win as many Pac-12 games. They beat Montana State 68-28 in an offensive explosion, and they beat them really good. And then they lost to USC 17-14. And everybody always talks about how Oregon State has upset USC tons of times. But Lincoln Riley, in a defensive slugfest, found a way to beat Oregon State. And Oregon State gave everything they had. They just could not score again and beat USC. But then they went back around and lost at Utah 42-16. And I think this game might have been because they put so much effort into the USC game that Utah beat them badly, and unfortunately they weren't competitive in that game at all. And I also having some problems at the quarterback position because Chance Nolan at quarterback has been their quarterback for over a year, and he's been really good for Oregon State. But lately he has been struggling. And against Utah, he only had 26 yards and 2 interceptions. So they benched him. And they went with backup quarterback Ben Gulbranson, and he didn't play too well either, and he only had 177 yards and 2 interceptions. So Oregon State's been an improved football team, but after starting the season 3-0, they've lost their last 2 games, and their quarterback play has really fallen apart, and Oregon State doesn't know who to go with. So we don't even know who's going to start for Oregon State in this game. So that's not a good look. That's not a good sign when you don't even know who your starting quarterback is. Running back Deshaun Fenwick at 44 yards. Oregon State needs to run the ball more. Their running game is struggling a little bit. And wide receiver Trayshawn Harrison at 96 yards. The throwing game at times is good, but if the quarterbacks, whoever it is, whether it's Chance Nolan or Ben Gulbranson, can cut down on the interceptions, then Oregon State's passing attack is competent. And on the defensive side of the ball, defensive back Alec Austin had 5 tackles, and defensive lineman Isaac Hodgins had 2 tackles. Oregon State's defense at times has been pretty good. They've given up some points in some games, but at times, like in the USC game, they played really well. On the Stanford side, David Shaw in Stanford is 1-3 this season. And David Shaw is one of the most respected head coaches in college football. He's been at Stanford for a decade. And unfortunately, ever since around 2018, and Bryce Love's been gone at running back, and Christian McCaffrey before that, and Andrew Luck way back when, they've been horrible for Stanford. Stanford has not been good. I think a lot of it has to do with the academics, and with the new age in college football, it's tougher for Stanford to be good. I think Stanford can still be a good football team, but there's just a lot of things going against Stanford on getting players. They're not getting the offensive linemen that they used to, and they're not running the football like they used to in the past. And their defense isn't even as good as it used to be. To start the season, they did beat Colgate 41-10, and that's a good win. You always want to beat a team like that. And then they lost to USC 41-28. And same as Oregon State has beaten USC a lot at home, Stanford's beaten USC a lot at home. But USC did get the win this time, 41-28. But then they lost at Washington 40-22. And they weren't really competitive in this game. Washington kind of laxed off at the end, and Stanford scored a couple times to make it more look a little bit more competitive, a little more interesting of a game, but it really wasn't that close. And then they lost at Oregon 45-27, and again, same thing. Stanford is not a terrible team, but they're not really that competitive against these better teams. Now, obviously, USC, Washington, and Oregon is a tough 3-game stretch. They're some of the best teams in the Pac-12. But Stanford still wasn't too competitive in them either. In that Oregon game, quarterback Tanner McKee had 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. And a lot of people think he's an NFL talent. He could be an NFL talent because of his size, but unfortunately he's not mobile. And again, Stanford's offensive line is not as good as it used to be, and he is getting sacked a lot, and that is what's preventing him from being as good as he can be. Running back Casey Filkins at 80 yards, and he had 59 receiving yards and a touchdown. So he's kind of a dual-threat running back. That's a good look for Stanford. Wide receiver Elijah Higgins at 44 yards and a touchdown. So, again, Stanford's offense is not bad, but they have to get better if they're going to win more games. And on the defense side of the ball, linebacker David Bailey at 7 tackles, cornerback Ethan Bonner 4 tackles, and safety Patrick Fields at 4 tackles. Stanford has given up a lot of points this season, but their defense has talent on the team, but they're just not stopping some of these premier offenses in the Pac-12 like USC, Washington, and Oregon. But can they beat Oregon State? Who do I think is going to win? This game right here is interesting because Stanford has been reeling as a program for years, and Oregon State's been kind of on the come-up. But in the last 2 games, Oregon State's been struggling, and their quarterback play, they can't even decide who's going to start in this game. So, again, both teams have problems. Stanford, as I said, their defense has not played great at times. They've been decent at times. But Oregon State's defense, to me, has been better as a whole, even though Oregon State has not gone through the 3-game gauntlet like Stanford has against USC, Washington, and Oregon yet. So maybe Oregon State would give up as many points as Stanford did. But I'm going to have to go with Oregon State in this game. I think they're going to win 28-21 over Stanford. I just think that they have a little bit more confidence still in Johnathan Smith and what they were doing earlier in the season, that they're going to find a way to win this game. I know Stanford upsets a lot of people, a lot of teams, but they could win, and maybe Stanford can get this win. But Stanford is just really struggling right now, and they've been through so many tough games. Oregon State's schedule has been a little bit easier, even though they've been through USC and Utah. Stanford's been through 3 tougher games. I think Oregon State's going to get this win barely on the road over Stanford 28-21. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below whether you think Oregon State or Stanford's going to win this game and why. And I will see you next time.